Boy, howdy, has it been a year. A year of videos, streams, scuff, and more. I really wasn't sure how this YouTube thing was gonna go, but I am so delighted by the community that we've built and all the lovely folks I've had the pleasure of meeting due to these videos. So I figured what better way to celebrate this first of hopefully many milestones than opening the floor for y'all to ask me whatever questions you have about me, the channel, Silverno, or what have you. Also, we'll be discussing EN server story content throughout this video, so consider this your spoiler warning. Let's dive into your queries and see what answers there are to be found. JTD647 asked, what inspired you to start creating videos about Twist and how long did you play before posting? I played Twist for a good year and a half, 2 years-ish before starting my channel, and my reasoning for starting YouTube was twofold. Firstly, I needed other people to talk about Twist with because none of my friends would indulge me anymore, which left only my poor patient father as my shoulder to dump on. But I could tell by the light leaving his eyes every time I mentioned the octopus guy that my enthusiasm was weighing heavily on his soul. So even if I was just shouting into the ether, there was a chance that other fans would join me in discussing various aspects of the game, and perhaps there were other folks like me out there who didn't really have an outlet for their thoughts. Creating this channel would provide a space for all of us to chat and share in our gameplay experiences, or at least that was that first intention of mine. Secondly, I was not able to find updated guides for certain game systems, and the guides that I was able to find did not have the information that I was searching for. Therefore, I decided to do it myself and compile the answers I was seeking into the guides that I've made because, again, if there were folks out there like me who had these questions too, or wanted this sort of information or these specific topics covered, they were likely running into similar frustrations when doing their own research, and there is no logical reason that we should all be suffering on our own when someone can just make a compiled list of things. And it's the reason that I specifically wanted to start with guides, because there were just so many things that I found out, like exams, having scoring criteria. Who would have ever thunk it? The guest room being a hell on earth. No one would expect that, right? And then maybe those could spark discussion about those gameplay systems, which could then lead into all of the things from the first point of creating a space where then we can just all discuss anything and everything about Twisted Wonderland. So those two things combined were my inspiration. A desire to connect with others and share knowledge over a game that I love, and perhaps in time we can connect over other games and other things too. As Twist does have a shelf life, it will expire someday. I hope it's not soon, and I don't expect it to be soon, but I do want to continue with YouTube because I do love the community that we have here, and I like creating content. It's very, very fun. So I hope to be able to continue that even after Twist is gone, which I guess is not part of your initial question, but nice extra tidbit you got there. Next up, SoulKingdomCreator requested that I tell us your journey of discovering Twisted Wonderland and its chaotic cast, which I think will also cover Jack's X4X's question of what was your first impression of Twist when you heard about it or when you started playing. So when I was a bit younger, I saw this video pop up onto my recommended feed titled something along the lines of Twisted Wonderland is for the girlies and the gays, with Kaleem's face on top of a pride flag, which I can no longer find, but at the time I thought, I'm a girly, and that guy looks cool. So I put that video in my watch later list and immediately forgot about it for like a month. Then I saw another thumbnail from Danny Mata, which poses the question, Disney dating sim? At which point I remembered the other video in my watch later playlist, so I went back to watch that one. And about 5 or so minutes in, if it was even that long, the lovely person who I cannot credit because I cannot find the video, I am so sorry, mentioned that the character designs were made by Yana Tobosa. My brain then loudly went, hey, that's the person who did that thing you liked in high school. That one anime thing that led you to your favorite band. That one. They had a hand in the pot of this thing, so you'll like this thing. I agreed with my brain on the spot and then did not finish the rest of that video, which is now lost to time, and instead immediately downloaded the game and set myself up for delight and disappointment both. Until book 2, I legitimately still believed that this was a dating sim and was super confused about the route mechanics because I am dumb. And then in book 3, I discovered the archive and album along with the fact that these characters are children, and I was mortified that I had been misled so greatly by my own lack of research and ability to read. However, this also explained why everyone was so gosh darn dumb. Because what do you mean our character is scripted to touch the super suspicious, totally a trap contract in book 3? How would you ever believe that that was going to be anything other than what it was? So much was explained that day. And now I'm here, deeply invested in this game and very adamant that folks have proper expectations when they dive into this world, lest they be blindsided like me. However, even though it wasn't what I was initially expecting, it still was such a fun game, and the story hooked me in so quickly, and then frustrated me so much in book 2, and then redeemed itself in book 3. There was just a whirlwind of emotions that happened between figuring all of the pieces out and discovering what the game actually was. And I think, in hindsight, it probably would have been better for me to have those expectations, of course, up front. But the world was just so delightful and created in such a unique way in my mind, and the way that the story was progressing was very interesting to me, because the second thought that I had once I realized it wasn't a dating sim was, how are they going to properly characterize all of these different characters, because there's so many of them, which was also a concern from the dating sim perspective, because how can you have this many roots? You don't, clearly. But that then became the question of, how are they going to do this? Are these characters going to be anything what I expect them to be? And for the most part, I've been really surprised by where they have taken certain characters and the journeys that they've been on. And the writing itself is very good, in my opinion. There are, of course, problems. Book 2. Leona. But on the whole, it is a very delightful story and a very wonderful world. And I am so glad that I eventually ended up watching those YouTube videos, or at least seeing those thumbnails and investigating the game. Hourglass Clock requested that I tell us about your favorite twist book and why it is your favorite. This is such a difficult question because there are a few that I like almost equally. However, since book 7 isn't finished as of this recording, it'll be disqualified on principle. And books 1 and 2 are kind of still the prologue, with one of them being so terribly written I don't even want to speak its name, book 2. So between 3, 4, 5, and 6, I think I have to go with book 3, because I'm just so biased towards Octavanel, and I felt so seen by Azul's journey and his emotional turmoil. The other overblottees from the other 3 books in this consideration, I understand on a conceptual level, and while there were pieces I could relate to in some of them, they were more shard than substance, particularly with Vil and Jamil. Azul, on the other hand, was like looking into a mirror if the reflection was a bit more productive, a bit less melancholic, and a boy. But I've struggled a lot with the same sorts of things Azul has, and while my experiences are different, the core of the struggles is the same. The way that I reacted to mine was extremely different from how Azul reacts to his. However, this difference has turned him into somewhat of a role model for me in certain aspects. Like, obviously, I do not want to indenture people to maximize my own profits, but I do try to take a more active role in shaping what I can become. But the essence of Azul's character was something that I really related to during his arc, and coming right out of book 2, the mystery and intrigue aspect of book 3 felt like such a gift. I knew exactly what was going to happen in book 2 by the second chapter, and then had to suffer through all of the Lion King shoehorning for the remaining chapters to finally have what I already knew revealed to me after a very sloppy whodunit mystery. Book 3, conversely, continued to tease us with possibilities, and it asks us a variety of questions. Why does Azul truly want this photo? Why would he decide to stake so many lives on something that could just be considered a dare? Why are Jade and Floyd running such intense defense for our efforts? How do we get around the contracts? How do we find their weaknesses? How do we piece all this together? And how do we do this in 3 days? These questions kept me much more engaged in the actual story, and as more information was revealed, the more I was able to connect the dots on my own without it being fully revealed, so I felt like I was discovering the truth alongside the characters in a very satisfying way. Book 3 also heavily benefits from having Book 2 precede it, because after that train wreck, almost anything would have been more engaging, so my reasoning is a bit skewed by that, and by my own emotions and connections, obviously. But Book 3 just remains my favorite even after all this time. Book 7 is gearing up to kind of take that place, but Book 7 also gives everyone time to shine and resolve their loose ends, so it's kind of in its own category instead because it is just so massive and involves everyone that it kind of almost feels like it shouldn't be included with the rest of the books for consideration. Like, it really feels like it should be its own separate thing. Nezwithagun asks, what drew you to the Tweels? All right, those guys. So initially, Azul, because at the start I had decided that he was my favorite character, so the Tweels sort of had a higher status compared to the other characters due to their proximity to Azul. But as soon as Beans Day happened, Floyd skyrocketed in my ranking. He just seemed like such a relatable chaos gremlin, and I became attached so quickly since his actions in that specific event were so relatable to me. I am not a fitness aficionado, so Floyd's choice to dip immediately and just sleep in a tree was iconic, as I too would love to just sleep away from the sporting event. And then the chaos that resulted from his participation in the actual sports game was so enjoyable. Even the very end, when he's being told to give up since he can't possibly get the harp himself, only to turn around and say, "Harp? What harp? I'm here for you, Sea Snake," was just so funny. R.I.P. Jamil, rest in peace. However, this in turn led to a curiosity about Jade because he's hidden for most of this event, or at least he's hidden in the second Beans Day, which was the only one that I've actually participated in. I do know that most of the information about him is locked behind that vignette for that specific event. So because of this, I just wanted to know how different or similar these two guys were, since I think there's a chapter at the very end of that event that talks about the two of them being peas in a pod. And it confused me at first since we didn't get to see much of Jade. So it just sparked this curiosity about finding out who he was as well. And boy, is he also delightful in a completely separate way as Floyd for obvious reasons. But I do find his character just very, very interesting. And I like that even though he's very similar to Sebastian from Black Butler, he still is in his own league. Like, there are some similarities, sure, and he is, like, Jade is very much a butler-like character, but I don't think that they are the same, and I was a little concerned about that at the beginning because he seems like such a Sebastian guy, but I think they're different enough, and I do think that Jade is different enough to stand on his own, and I think he's much more delightful, in my opinion, than Sebastian from Black Butler. But also, once Book 3 came around and we actually got to interact with the Tweels more and see their personalities more, I was cooked. I was roasted. I was done. It's just been this way ever since. I love them both so dearly. so dearly. Akat Studios 8853 asked, how will this affect Azul's stock prices? Lord if I know. To be honest, I didn't even know he had his own stock, so that's kind of cool. Thank you for that lovely knowledge. But who's to say? Who can say? Just Mega Cool asks, what were your worst and best twist character cards summoning experiences? Well, I think the best at this point in time was Beans Day Floyd, not because I got him early or it was super lucky. In fact, he made me go all the way to 70 before he showed up. But he did appear before the pity mark during a time when featured cards were not guaranteed, so in hindsight, this was incredibly fortunate. This single card has carried my entire account through so many battles and challenges, and it remains one of my favorites to this day. In fact, I remember exactly where I was when I summoned this card. I remember the feeling of joy. I remember it so vividly. I remember the time of day. I remember what the air tasted like. I don't know why this has become such a core memory for me, but in that way, Bean Boy Floyd is absolutely one of the best summoning experiences I've had. In the more traditional sense, though, it would go to all of the Glorious Masquerade SSRs, since I was able to get Azul and Mal before Soft Pity and then Edia at Soft Pity. Plus, Rolo showed up at 30, so I only had to spend one key set to get him during his initial release, making the whole set of Glorious Masquerade cards incredibly lucky pulls and more conventional best summoning, I suppose. The worst, though, was Crowley. Crowley made me go to the 60/40 and showed up on the very last summon, like the dramatically unresponsible adult he is. But at least he did finally show up, otherwise his goose would have been thoroughly cooked. I was legitimately scared that I was not going to get him, and I don't believe I had enough keys to try to go for the 200 mark. I typically never do. So that was a little sweaty. That was a little uh-oh moment. Ernesto did the same exact thing, but he gets a pass because he's pretty. Lilia Van Rouge asked 2 questions. I'm curious what you pick for your Pokemon team, and I'd love to hear why your favorite character is your fave. For the Pokemon question, my team is just full of my favorite Pokemon and has no semblance of order. We've got Cubone, Fuecoco, Aegislash, Chandelure, Hawlucha, and Dedusai, who I guess have a lot more in common than I initially gave them credit for, since most of them are ghosts. However, I think they're all just so fun and fancy, and I love them very dearly. There is no strategy here, it is just vibes, but that is what's important. As for my favorite character, Ernesto has taken over my brain ever since his release, and after obtaining his card, I think I've become an apologist. He is everything that I want in a character. I love his little slimeball conman shtick. I love how simultaneously street smart and book dumb he is. He's got good drip. He's got a great voice. In fact, the vocal performance is so amazingly good for how little Ernesto talks. It is just chef's kiss. And realistically, his character is fantastic on every level. He even makes a fantastic villain, although his motivations are a little bit confused. I am still salty about how Playful Land ends, and I really wish his conscience would have formed while Kaleem was on the table. I think this would have been way more compelling narratively and would have made Ernesto into a bit more of a redeemable character, I guess, than I think he currently is. If he even is redeemable, I'm not sure. I'm willing to give him a second chance, but he is on real thin ice even still. Pretty privilege can only get you so far. However, from a character standpoint, I think he's amazing. 10 out of 10, 5 stars. That was that. That was all the questions that were asked at the time that I went to poll them. I'll likely do another one of these at some point in the future, but I hope you had fun learning a little more about me and my Twisted Wonderland and YouTube journey. If you did, drop a like, drop a comment, maybe even subscribe if you've not done so already, and I'll see you again soon. Just remember that you're amazing, and I hope you have a wonderful day.